Welcome to another episode of The Lion's Den. In today's episode, we speak with Ryan Weiss, who's the founder of a company called Effective Performance Strategies. Now, Ryan has developed something over years called the optics system that I think you're going to find very, very interesting. A lot of entrepreneurs out there I know have trouble with processes. There's always sort of stress that comes from their people not running processes properly. Well, we dig into Ryan's optics system, and I think it's very eye-opening the way that he goes beyond just process mapping, which you'll hear in this episode, and he goes layers deeper than that through the optics system to really understand handoffs between teams, the handoffs from one process to the next, and the intersection of process and people. And the system he's built helps to facilitate a much smoother handoff and alignment across all those different categories. So you're going to like this one. Ryan's a really cool guy. Give this a listen. Ryan, welcome to the Lion's Den.
Thanks so much. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's been a couple of weeks since we talked last. And we're definitely going to dive into your company, Effective Performance Strategies. But I wanted to get a little bit of background on you first. And so I was on your LinkedIn page and I saw all the way back in the 90s, you started a lawn care company. Was that your first entrepreneurial pursuit, or did it start even earlier than that?
Yeah, well, I had a paper route when I was really young. Kids don't do those anymore, right? But back when I was very young, I had a paper route. So I always had some ambition at a young age. So yeah, I started that back in the 90s. It's called Weiss Lawn Care. My youngest brother, I was just texting with him earlier today, still runs that business, and he has 4 locations now. I think he's got 50 some trucks, just keeps expanding. So it's amazing to be part of have been part of founding something that has grown like that over the years.
Wow, that's awesome. And so at what point did you decide to, I'm just sort of scrolling up your LinkedIn page here. At what point did you decide to leave that company that you started and then join what looks like a very large multinational corporation?
Yeah, so it was part of my journey of career growth and exploration. So I really started the lawn care company to pay my way through college and save up some money. And so, that was really the purpose of it. So I ran that company for 5 years and grew it to the point where I was able to pay for my college and get out debt free, which is kind of unheard of today. But back then that was the purpose of it. So I sold it to my middle brother when I left for college, and he sold it to our youngest brother. And my middle brother now works for the youngest brother. So it stayed in the family all those years, but it was really intentional. I went away to college, got degrees in chemistry and finance, and coming out of college, went and worked for a large corporation. So
wow, okay. And what did that corporation do, and what was your role there?
Yeah, so went through a couple of different acquisitions over the years. I moved actually 7 times in 17 years. It was National Starch and Chemical. At the end, it was called Henkel. So adhesives and consumer products and starches. So it was a pretty large global company. Henkel is it's over 20 billion euros in annual sales, and 50,000 employees. And so I had a variety of roles, everything from technical to leading technical teams and process improvements and business development. Like I said, they moved me 7 times in 17 years. And so I had a wide variety of roles, lived in Asia a couple of times actually, and managed some large global teams, and ended my career there managing as a global technology manager for about $500 million worth of chemicals around the world. And that was the last role I had there before coming back into the entrepreneurial world.
Wow. Where in Asia did you live?
Yeah, so we lived in Singapore for a couple of years, right around the 2008, 2009 economic crisis. Okay. I think a lot of people remember that. I was very fortunate to be living in Singapore at that time and not have real estate back here in the States. So we lived in Singapore for a couple of years and got the opportunity to travel all over Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, a lot of time in China. Really got exposed to what the Asian economies looked like over there, and then moved back to the States for a few years, and then moved back to the Philippines. So we lived in Manila just outside of Manila, Philippines, for about 3 years, and that was a completely different experience. So.
And were you bringing your family along with you when you went to these places?
Absolutely. So our twins are 22 years old now, and they were able. They made most of those moves with us. So they attended school in Singapore and the Philippines and Chicago and New Jersey, and so they bounced around between schools. Which, looking back, I'm like, great experiences, but it also gave them, maybe some challenges along the way as well. Like, one of my son told me one day, he said, "Dad, when we moved to New Jersey, actually, he said, Dad, I don't want to, I don't want to make friends here in New Jersey because I'll just have to say goodbye." And that was like his lived experience of moving every 3 years through his childhood. But you know, great experiences, and they're well developed today. So.
Yeah, and they had all the multicultural experience that people who just grew up their whole lives in New Jersey wouldn't have. And I that I travel a lot too. I live in the
Yep.
Caribbean right now, and it's something that we work with a lot of our clients on. Is this idea that like you don't have to just walk the beaten path. You can live abroad and take time to enjoy a little bit of like exploration. You don't just have to grind it out at your business every day. So hearing your
Absolutely.
story and the fact that you could actually like bring your kids with you wherever you were and they got along just fine, it's another good testament.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason that they live in Florida and Colorado today, rather than anywhere close to me. So they're exploring the world.
That's right. Curious. I have kind of a curiosity here because I've never. I mean, look, I live all over the place, but all my clients are in the U.S. So when you're working in Singapore or in the Philippines, is it drastically different, like the work life specifically, or is it kind of the same stuff? You're solving the same problems. Like what are the differences?
Yeah, I think many of the problems that we encounter in life are either people related or process related, right? And I sort of take process, technology, those types of things. And really, anywhere that I've lived in the world or worked, people experience challenges in those two buckets and the intersection of those two buckets. So, definitely there are very different cultures. I experienced very different cultures being in, South China or in Singapore or in the Philippines, or even the time I, spent really working and traveling in Europe. There's cultural nuances to all of these things, but similar challenges, right? People all over the world want to make money, provide for their families, provide a better life, and the challenges that people run into when they don't have a good process, when they don't have clear accountability or clear expectations, those exist everywhere, regardless of the cultural nuances that happen.
Yeah, makes sense. So that's a good segue into effective performance strategies, your company that you run now, which you basically focus on the intersection of people and process with that company. So I guess before we dig into the content of what you do specifically, what led you to start that company? And I guess this was in 2016 you started the company?
Yeah, it would have been 2016. I walked away from the corporate role, corporate career, and decided I was like, I was an entrepreneur before, and I can be an entrepreneur again. And part of it was a desire to build something on my own, and not not sort of just stay in a large corporation. But I'm like, I want to go out and build something again. I was passionate and excited to go and build something and sort of blaze a path, if you will. And and that was the opportunity in 2016 that I had talked to a mentor of mine. I'd reached out to him probably in mid 2015, who had done the same thing, had left a corporate career. It was probably 15 years before that, but I reached out to him. I'm like, "Hey, Brian, tell me a little bit about what you did and how you did it. I've got young kids at home. I've got a wife. I've got, and I'm thinking about pulling the ripcord and jumping out of the plane." And he invited me out to his home at the time in Phoenix, Arizona. And I went out there, spent the weekend with him and his wife, and talked through the challenges that they had faced and all these things. But that passion for let's go build something new was really in my blood, and I was ready for it. Well, it was different though. When I was younger, I was like really, really hungry. At that point in my career, I had lived in foreign countries and had, helpers living in our home, like, people taking care of lots of things. And all of a sudden I'm like, I'm going to go out and blaze a new path. It was different at that time than it was when I was young.
Yeah, I bet. All right. So you start that company 2016. And let's maybe just dig into what you do specifically.
Yeah.
And maybe you can tell me through the lens of like an example. So a business owner comes to you. What are they saying? What are they experiencing that leads them to come to you in the first place?
Yeah. So often what people are experiencing, there's a number of different symptoms that may be occurring. So one of the specific examples recently, I had a client, manufacturing company, that they've been a client for a while now, but they said, you know what, we've got this billing problem. We've got this issue with our invoicing process, and we need some help solving it. So I went in and took a look at it. They really didn't have a billing problem. We watched them do 20 out of the 30 invoices that they sent out were really, really easy. Took, a minute each. So 20 minutes later, I'm like, we don't have a billing problem, right? But the other 10, we had to go out and talk to people and ask questions and try to, and looking at the real source of the problem was far upstream. They had 4 different methods of order entry that were happening: a Google Sheet, an Excel spreadsheet, a database, and an accounting software like system that all these different things that were causing chaos all the way through their system, that were resulting in the symptom that the business owner was feeling, which is our billing process is broken. It's taking too long. So it can come in many different forms. It could be frustrations that employees are having with something. It could be customer frustrations and customer retention. It could be, lots and lots of different problems really happen at the intersection of people and process. Yeah.
Okay. So a business owner would come to you when they're experiencing something in their business that is just not going well.
It's not going well. It's a misalignment.
Okay.
It's a problem. Yeah.
Okay. And so you said, you would look into it, right? You said, I looked into their billing process. So what does that look like? Like what exactly are you doing when you sit down to work with that company?
Yeah.
What's step one?
Awesome. Yeah. So the first step of the Optic system is purpose, scope, and gaps. And so every step of the process, what we're looking to do and what we guarantee is that you'll see value at every step of the process. So the very first step is, why is this work stream important? What's the purpose of this work stream that we're talking about? What's the scope of it? Where does it start and end? And what are the gaps? What's the pain that you're feeling today? The very first step is purpose, scope, and gaps.
Okay. And so in that example that you gave then about the manufacturing company and the billing issue, the purpose is we need to get these bills out so we can get paid for what we've done.
That's right.
Then the scope, you said kind of where does it start? Where does it end? This is probably where you started to identify the problem, I would think, because that's probably where they said, well, here's where it starts. Our billing person goes in and they start billing the customers. And you're like, well, how do they know what to bill the customers? And they're like, oh, order entry.
That's not where it starts, right? It starts all the way upstream at order entry. And so that discussion that we had about the scope, what is the scope of this issue that we're seeing and the problems that you're trying to do? So it's the beginning of that navigation. Purpose, scope, and gaps all linked together hand in hand.
Okay. So you did that with this client, right? You identified way upstream in the scope. You identified where the gaps are. What is the next step then in the process?
Yeah. So step number 2 is something that we call a SIPOC. And it's a wonky sounding acronym, but the SIPOC stands for suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. And this is a really, really powerful and unique tool in that when people look at process, they often just say, well, let's just document the steps. Let's just document what we do. Let's document how we do it. The SIPOC provides you a framework where you have to think about your process, but you also have to think about the suppliers to that process. What are those handoffs that need to happen? What do I need from other people in order to do my process step? And what do other people need from me? And this is often where I find process breaking down in organizations. Maybe inside of a department, inside of a billing department at a company, they might say, well, we've documented our billing process. Yeah, but if you don't have the right inputs coming from the right people, then you can't do your billing process. Same thing in a construction company. We've documented our daily logs and how we do daily logs. Well, but if pre-construction didn't give the operations the right handover, and if you don't have the right way of communicating with owners, like those handoffs are really the problem people often experience in terms of the process, right? So it's this intersection of people and process. That's what the SIPOC is.
That is really interesting. Okay, so it sounds like what you're saying is a lot of companies, when they go in to do some process documentation, they're doing the P of the SIPOC.
That's right.
They're doing just that one of 5 steps, basically, or one of 5 documentation pieces.
That's right.
And so they have that process, but if they haven't identified what they need going into it or what the process is supposed to output and to who, that process just is kind of sitting there as a standalone.
That's right.
It's interesting. And my brain is going to your chemistry background. And I'm thinking about processes are like just independent, molecules or compounds or something like that. But if you don't create the bond between the process in billing and the process in customer service or whatever, if you're not bonding the molecules together, they're not working together at all. So there's just there's no flow. And am I also right in thinking that SIPOC, it ends with C, is the C at the end of one SIPOC, the S at the beginning of the next SIPOC?
That's a great way of thinking of it. Yeah. So absolutely. The customers for one sort of swim lane of a SIPOC, one key process step, those customers often become suppliers to the next process step. And making that link on one page, I've literally done thousands of these over the past 20 years of my life. And I've found them to be the most impactful way to sit down with a team of people and very quickly zero in on where the problems are in terms of process and people and expectations. And in fact, we did one of these in Mandarin Chinese in South China through translators. And the business owner at the end of about an hour looked at me and he said, I don't speak Mandarin, but he looked at me, he said, you understand my business better than my team does. In 1 hour of building the SIPOC of a diaper manufacturing plant, the owner of the company looked at me, he said, in a different language, right? Through a translator. He said, you understand my business better than my people. I had never been in a diaper manufacturer in my life. But this framework provides such clarity of what are the things that need to happen, who are the customers, internal and external, who are the suppliers of the inputs you need. And in a very short period of time, we start looking at 3 or 4 boxes on the SIPOC and saying, this is where your problems are, aren't they? Because when the team starts, having some conflict, when the team says, no, that's not what happens, this happens, you know that you've found a real problem in terms of a handoff.
Yeah. So I've worked in some large companies in my career, and I know that as a company gets bigger, they definitely experience kind of like a siloing effect. Yeah. Where this whole SIPOC method would be super useful because you literally have teams that almost get competitive with one another and really don't do a good job of communicating. So the SI and the OC pieces feeding into the next teams don't work very well. Would you say that this works best for larger companies? Is there a certain size company this works really well for? What do you think?
Wow. I'll tell you what. I've seen it work across all sizes of organizations, and literally all sizes. I first learned about the SIPOC when I was also going through the Dale Carnegie How to Win Friends and Influence People. And
Mhm.
my sister-in-law asked me what I did for work. And I thought I could explain about manufacturing and chemistry and all these things, or I could talk to her about what's important to her. That's what Dale Carnegie teaches. So I said, well, let's
Mhm.
build a SIPOC of your process. She was a piano teacher, right? She's a piano teacher. At the time, she was a piano teacher. And I said, well, where does your process start? How do you find students to come into your class? And where does your process end? And she said, well, I want students to develop a sincere appreciation for music. But we started identifying stakeholders, the parents of the students, and the local school band, and the for the local school, and you start thinking about the suppliers and customers. So it goes all the way to a piano teacher teaching piano in her home, all the way up to multinational $20 billion company sitting in a boardroom looking at it and saying, here's the process of how customers go through their journey with us. Here's the suppliers who need to be part of it. Here's the customer. It absolutely works. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. It's a blast. I work at all levels of organizations of all sizes, and this just works.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so the company did the first step. They did the second step, which is the SIPOC, right? So they have this kind of all mapped out at this point. So I guess at that point they have a pretty clear understanding of the way that their process and handoffs, the intersection between people and process, needs to work.
Mm-hmm.
What's the next step after that? Is that it?
No. So step 3 is something I call QVS. So it's about expectations. So we could take each swim lane of the SIPOC, each of the key process steps of that SIPOC work stream, and we look at and ask the question, what are your expectations around quality, value, and speed for this process step? And clearly defining the expectations around quality. What's the quality output? Like, how do you know that this process step was done? The value, what's the value of this process step, or what cost consideration should we have here? And then the speed or timeliness of the step. We can really very clearly in this third step talk about what are the expectations that need to happen in order for you to effectively run this SIPOC.
Okay, interesting. And what sorts of enlightenment do people get from the QVS? Like, what is that really teaching them or bringing that out of them?
Yeah. So I could give a quick example. A general contractor who was looking at their invoicing process. So they've got to get their invoices from their subcontractors, and they've got to pass them on to the owner, and then they've got to collect payment. And so they kind of go through all this. The quality, value, and speed for that type of process. In terms of quality, you've got to have good, clear invoices from the subcontractor. You've got to make sure that you've got them put into your system in a proper way, so that then the quality gets delivered to the owner who's going to pay the invoice. And then so there's this quality component for each of those steps. Then there's a value component, which is, do we actually have the right dollar value in each of these, right? Like, do we have the right markup happening? Do we have the right values here so that it moves all the way through? And then in terms of timeliness, they might say, well, we invoice the owner of our construction project at the end of every month. In order to do that, I need to first have the invoices from the subcontractors 7 days before the end of the month, so that I can process them and get them in my system 3 days before the end of the month, so that we can send the invoice to the owner 1 day before the end of the month, so that the owner will pay us within 3 days of the end of the month, and so that we can do our accounts receivable reporting 5 days later if somebody's not paying what they're supposed to. So you can look at the timeliness or the speed of it. You look at the value of it. Do we have the right value being created at each step? You look at the quality of what the expectations are, because you've got to make sure that all of the stakeholders get it, that the subcontractor knows what quality, value, and speed means, that the superintendent and project manager know what it means, so that the finance department can do what they need to do, so that the owner can pay, so that right? So you think about those handoffs, the quality, value, and speed is critical at every step of the process. And if you don't have that clearly defined, things go off the rails and finger pointing starts.
Okay, I get it. And I think that is another big area where most companies, when they do process documentation, they're missing this information. That's not in
Absolutely.
there.
Absolutely.
They've got all the steps that need to happen, but nowhere does it say if this step happens and it's at a suboptimal quality, here's all the negative downstream effects that are going to occur and the whole thing's going to break. Right.
That's right.
So, okay. So QVS, super important. That's sort of like the deeper level of exactly what we need at each step of the process.
Absolutely.
Okay. Then what? Is that it?
So step 5. So
Okay.
The next step is what we call the ARM. It's the accountability responsibility matrix. So if you think about each of those swim lanes that I was just describing, somebody's got to be accountable for making sure that these subcontractors submit their invoices in a timely manner and they're correctly invoiced. Somebody's got to be responsible for following up, and somebody's got to be responsible for compiling them. And so there's this accountability responsibility matrix that we put together in order to help really have clarity around, this is the work stream. This is the optics work stream we've just defined. This is the SIPOC of it. So we start seeing the people and process. This is the quality, value, and speed expectations. And then here's the accountability responsibility matrix. And when you do those 4 steps, I apologize, I said 5 earlier. When you do those 4 steps, you're at the 4th step now. At this moment, when somebody says, well, nobody's really accountable for that, this person just, there's a problem. If you can't define who's accountable and who's responsible and what are they responsible to do for each of the swim lanes, then you've got problems with handoffs. I can almost guarantee it.
Yeah. Well, I love how you break it down into those different steps. And I mean, at the end of the day, what you described is a step-by-step approach to building very clear processes. Really, it's really building a clear operation, because it's the intersection of all of the processes within the organization. So that's the operations. That's how I would define that.
Right.
And the operation of a business is complex, and there's many steps to it often. And so you're sort of breaking it down into bite-sized chunks, making it clear, and creating alignment. Do you find when you work with these companies, I'm sure the answer to this is yes, but you can elaborate. Do you find that when you work with these companies and you finish a project like this, everything is running more smoothly? Like, and it seems to me this would be something that like leaders would latch onto because it clarifies everything. But what about the other employees at the business who, like, are they able to grasp this as well? Do they care to grasp this as well? Does this give them the clarity that they were looking for? Like, what have you seen in the reaction to this process?
Yeah, that's a great question, because for sure in the boardroom, we want to have alignment and we want to have clarity and we want to have all these things. But this is really about where the rubber meets the road. So I'll give an example. There was a general contractor. They were building Amazon warehouses and they build commercial buildings and all these things. And we did this for, we actually created a couple dozen work streams. They kept going through and doing this for the core work streams that made their business run. And I was at a conference with a general superintendent, right? Very no BS kind of guy, right? This is like, he'll tell you how it is. And I asked him the question, I'm like, Rick, tell me, do you actually find this useful, or are you just doing this because Jeff told you to, or because the ownership told you to? And they said, Ryan, when I first met you, I was your biggest skeptic. I'm like, this guy doesn't know construction. What's he gonna? He said, but I use it every day now, because as a general superintendent, I've got these projects and I've got job sites and I'm dealing with project managers and project engineers. And he's like, I now know if somebody comes to me and says, your superintendent didn't do this, he said, I can look at the work stream and say, he wasn't responsible for doing that. That was the project engineer needed to do this and so at all levels of the organization, you get people starting to see, if I have clarity of what I'm responsible for, and what other people are responsible for and where that handoff occurs and how it occurs, it makes your job so much easier. And in fact, I had a training company that we did this with a while back, and they were in a very stressful place. Like we had their entire team. It wasn't a huge team, but 7-8 people. And at the beginning of our engagement, their entire team was frustrated. They were like, we don't have time to document our work streams, our processes. We don't have time for that. We're stressed out. After 6 months, across the board, it wasn't perfect. There were still people who were stressed and things like that. But across the board, there was a dramatic improvement in terms of their feedback around, I now know where my boundaries are. I now know where I can hand something off to somebody else. I now know I can go home at the end of the day and say, I did these key parts. It's not about saying that that's not my job. That's not my job. But having clarity about what am I responsible for? What does quality look like of when I'm done with my work product to hand it off to the next department? And the amount of satisfaction, job satisfaction, raised dramatically. We have some anonymous surveys we did at the beginning and end, and there was a dramatic improvement for across the board.
I'm not surprised at all. And honestly, a lot of companies that we work with too, we recognize that if there's not clear swim lanes of responsibility, what you end up with is a lot of people who are duplicating work. Like you've got multiple people doing the same job a lot of times. That's sort of like the better negative impact of no clear swim lanes. The worse impact of no clear swim lanes is when nobody's doing a specific job because they all think somebody else is doing that specific job. And so things just completely fall through the cracks. So you've got this combination of we're duplicating work or nobody's doing it. That's not a good combination. And of course, that's going to lead to stress because there's only so many hours in the workday. If you're duplicating any of those hours, it's not going to lead to a good result. So
that's right. That's right.
Awesome. Cool. Well, so Ryan, what is a good first step for people who want to learn more about the optics system and your, frameworks and methodologies?
Yeah, so there's a really, at the bottom underneath my name on the screen there, opticsbook.com. So September 19th, I am super excited. I just got some pre-release copies in my office the other day. So September 19th, we are going to be launching the optics book. So if you go to opticsbook.com, you can pre-register to be part of that. If this launches, or if you're listening to this after September 19th, you can still go to opticsbook.com and you'll be able to walk through. We've got our podcast there. We've got the book. We've got content. We also have this software system that enables people to do this. So we have a software system that enables people to walk through those steps we just defined. And so you can do it yourself, or you can come all the way up to, we do custom facilitation of this for clients as well. So I would say start at opticsbook.com. You'll be able to read all about the 5 key steps there and get through that process.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. Like Ryan said, for everybody listening, go ahead and go to opticsbook.com, go to Ryan's website. You can find more information. Highly recommend it. Ryan and his team do a really, really good job of fixing any of your issues at the intersection of people and process. So, Ryan, thank you for joining me in the Lion's Den.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure, Nico.